The suit he had borrowed for the job interview was now engulfed in flames on his back. Smoke seeped through the door cracks like dark, grasping fingers. The 7th floor of the Harbor Light Hotel, an aging building in downtown Minneapolis, had become a deadly trap. Emergency lights flickered amid the wailing sirens. Shattered glass crunched underfoot. The acrid smell of burning plastic mixed with distant screams. And in the midst of it all, one man was charging against the fleeing crowd. Elias Ford, 38 years old, limped slightly on his left knee from an old injury sustained during his days as a firefighter. He gripped the scorching metal railing of the emergency stairwell with his bare hands. He wasn't in uniform anymore, just a cheap white shirt, borrowed dress pants, and a second-hand suit jacket from a church friend, all singed and reeking of smoke. He was risking everything, and he knew it. But as he passed the 6th floor, Elias had heard a desperate cry from above, followed by a resounding crash like someone pounding on a window for help. It wasn't the shout of someone still alert. It was the final gasp of a person fading away. And Elias had turned back. Room 723, 7th floor. The smoke was black as coal. One side of the hallway had already collapsed. The door was ajar, flames reflecting off the curtains inside. Elias shouldered it open. The hinges gave way with a snap. A woman lay slumped beneath the window. Her business dress was scorched on one side. Her hair was disheveled face smeared with ash, lips cracked from the toxic air. She had tried to pry the window open, the old-style glass bolted into the frame, impossible to break without tools. He rushed forward, draping his jacket over her face, crouching low and hoisting her onto his back. She was lighter than he expected, but her choking coughs told him time was running out. She didn't have many minutes left. He backed out the door just as a section of the ceiling caved in behind them. The fire began devouring the hallway. Elias ran. The 6 flights of stairs were no longer an escape. They were an inferno. Each step down sent a spike of pain through his knee like nails being hammered in. His eyes blurred from the smoke, but a slender hand weakly clutched his shoulder. She was still alive. And that was enough. When he reached the ground floor, firefighters were bursting through the main entrance. EMTs shouted as Elias emerged charred and carrying an unconscious woman. They eased her onto a stretcher. One pressed an oxygen mask to her face. Elias collapsed against the curb, coughing violently, his chest burning. His left hand was blistered from the hot metal. The woman he had saved opened her eyes faintly and grasped his shirt sleeve. "It's not an accident." Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. Then she slipped away again. A woman's voice cut through beside him. "I'm Lieutenant Ruby Valdez, arson investigation. You just came from room 723. Elias nodded, exhausted. "Give me your ID. Are you involved?" Elias fumbled for his wallet, pulling out an old business card, a scrap he had printed 2 years ago when he was a temporary safety consultant for a construction firm. "Elias Ford, my number's on the back." He pressed it into her hand and stood limping away. Valdez called after him. "Where are you going?" Elias didn't turn back. "I have a job interview and a daughter waiting for me at home." Elias Ford's life had been a series of fires, literal and figurative. At 38, he was a single father to 7-year-old Sophie, whose asthma required expensive inhalers and frequent doctor visits. His wife had died in a car accident 5 years ago, leaving him to navigate grief while piecing together odd jobs, driving for ride shares, washing dishes, anything that allowed him to be home for Sophie's nebulizer treatments. He had once been a decorated firefighter, saving lives in blazing structures. But a collapse during a rescue had shattered his left knee, forcing him out of the force. No pension for partial disability, no safety net. Just the weight of bills and the invisible scars of failure. Today was supposed to change that. He had borrowed the suit from a church acquaintance, polished his resume, and prepared for the interview at Helix Dynamics, a cutting-edge tech firm in Minneapolis. The position, head of safety and emergency response. Starting salary $62,000 a year, enough to cover Sophie's meds, enough to pay rent on their cramped apartment, enough to breathe. But as he staggered away from the hotel suit in tatters and skin blistered, Elias wondered if fate was laughing at him. He hailed a cab with his last $20, directing it to the Helix building. He didn't know the woman he had saved was Alexandra Hale, the CEO of the very company he was interviewing for, or that her whisper, "not an accident," was the spark of something much larger. But in that moment, all Elias cared about was making it to the interview on time. For Sophie, for a chance at a new beginning. At 9:03 a.m., Elias stepped into the gleaming lobby of the Helix Dynamics headquarters, his borrowed dress pants still damp from the hasty wipe-down in a corner drugstore restroom. The building towered over downtown Minneapolis, a sleek monolith of glass and steel that screamed corporate success. Elias, however, looked like he'd crawled out of a war zone, his white shirt smudged with soot hair disheveled and a makeshift bandage on his left hand covering the fresh blisters. The smell of smoke clung to him like a second skin, drawing sidelong glances from the suited professionals milling about. He ignored them. In the elevator to the 20th floor, he leaned against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment. Sophie. That was his anchor. 7 years old, with her mother's bright eyes and a laugh that could light up their dim apartment. But her asthma attacks came without warning. Wheezing fits that required expensive inhalers and emergency room visits they could barely afford. Last month, he'd skipped his own doctor's appointment to pay for her nebulizer refills. This job wasn't just a paycheck, it was survival. The doors opened to a pristine reception area. A young assistant led him to the conference room where 2 interviewers waited. Clark Jensen, the operations director, a sharp-featured man in his 50s with a no-nonsense stare, and Rita Lee, the head of HR, who offered a polite but guarded smile. The third chair was empty. Mr. Ford. Clark began glancing at his watch and then at Elias's disheveled appearance. You're cutting it close. Let's start with your background. Elias sat, his knee throbbing with every shift in weight. He explained his history steadily, 10 years as a firefighter in the Minneapolis department, rising to captain before the incident that ended it all. A warehouse, Blaze, a trapped child he'd gone back in against orders. The roof collapsed, shattering his knee and ending his career. No full pension for a reckless decision, as the review board called it. After that, odd jobs, construction safety gigs, night shifts at warehouses, anything flexible enough for Sophie's needs. Rita nodded sympathetically. And why Helix? We're a tech firm, not a fire station. Elias leaned forward. Because safety isn't about gadgets or protocols on paper. It's about knowing when a system fails before it does. I've seen buildings that looked fine on blueprints but crumbled in reality. Helix builds tech for real-world applications, drone security systems. I can make sure they don't fail when lives are on the line. Clark's expression remained skeptical, flipping through Elias's resume. Impressive field work, but no corporate experience. How do you handle high-stakes decisions under pressure? Before Elias could respond, the door opened. A woman entered her presence, commanding the room. She was in her mid-30s, dressed in a tailored blazer and slacks, her dark hair pulled back severely. But her face, smudged faintly with ash eyes, shadowed from exhaustion, told a different story. Alexandra Hale paused mid-stride, her gaze locking onto Elias. Recognition flickered in her eyes, traveling from his bandaged hand to his soot-streaked shirt. Ms. Hale, Clark said, standing quickly. We weren't expecting you to join. Alexandra didn't acknowledge him. She approached the table, her voice steady but laced with something deeper. Continue. Rita cleared her throat. Mr. Ford was just discussing his experience. Alexandra sat in the empty chair, her eyes never leaving Elias. I think I already know about his experience. The room fell silent. Clark exchanged a confused glance with Rita. You saved me, Alexandra said softly, addressing Elias directly. From the fire at Harbor Light. This morning. Elias's breath caught. He hadn't recognized her in the chaos, the smoke, the panic. But now, in the harsh fluorescent light, it clicked. The woman slumped by the window, her desperate whisper about it not being an accident. I did what anyone would, he replied, his voice rough from the smoke inhalation. Alexandra shook her head. Not anyone. You went back in, Clark interrupted. Wait, this is the man from the news, the hotel fire. Alexandra ignored him, turning to the others. I'd like to continue this interview alone. Rita hesitated but nodded, gathering her notes. Clark lingered a moment longer, his skepticism turning to outright wariness before following her out. The door clicked shut. Alexandra leaned back, studying Elias. You saved my life and then showed up here looking like that for a job interview. Elias met her gaze evenly. I have a daughter, Sophie. She's 7 with severe asthma. We need the insurance, the stability. I couldn't miss this. Alexandra's expression softened a crack in her polished facade. She pulled a folder from her bag, sliding it across the table. "This is a new position I've been considering, Director of Integrated Safety and Risk Management. It reports directly to me. More responsibility, but it fits someone with your instincts." Elias didn't touch the folder. "I appreciate it, Ms. Hale, but I don't want this because I pulled you out of a fire. I want it because I can do the job." She smiled faintly, the first real emotion breaking through. "Call me Alexandra, and I believe you can." As Elias left the building that afternoon, offer in hand, a weight lifted from his shoulders. But beneath it lurked a new unease, the invisible barriers of corporate politics and the lingering question of why Alexandra had been in that hotel room at all. For now, though, he focused on Sophie. She deserved good news tonight. Elias's first week at Helix Dynamics was a whirlwind of paperwork and orientations, but he dove in with the focus of a man who had stared down flames before. As the new Director of Integrated Safety and Risk Management, he spent his days poring over blueprints and protocols, interviewing maintenance staff and engineers, people Clark Jensen and the executive team rarely acknowledged. Elias listened to their concerns: faulty wiring in the server rooms, outdated sprinkler systems, emergency exits that jammed during drills. He made notes, sketched improvements, and reported directly to Alexandra, who approved his initial changes without hesitation. Their meeting started professional, but quickly deepened. In her corner office overlooking the Minneapolis skyline, Alexandra shared fragments of her past. "My mother died in a factory fire 17 years ago," she confessed one afternoon, her voice steady, but her fingers tracing the edge of her desk. "Official report said electrical fault. But I've always suspected more someone covering up negligence." Elias nodded, recognizing the haunted look in her eyes. He opened up in return about his wife's accident, the drunk driver who walked away unscathed while she didn't. About Sophie's asthma, the midnight hospital runs that left him exhausted but unbreakable. "She's my fire line," he said quietly. "The one thing that keeps me grounded." Alexandra began visiting his apartment unannounced, bringing takeout or toys for Sophie. The first time, Sophie peeked from behind the couch, wary but curious. "Are you the lady Daddy saved?" she asked, clutching her inhaler. Alexandra knelt to her level, smiling softly. "Yes, and he's saving a lot more people now." Sophie warmed quickly, showing off her drawing stick figures of firefighters and princesses. Elias watched from the kitchen, his chest tightening with an unfamiliar warmth. For the first time in years, his home felt less empty. But beneath the budding connection, tension simmered at Helix. Whispers spread through the halls. The hero hire was a liability, a blue-collar outsider in a white-collar world. Clark Jensen fueled the fire in closed-door meetings with the board. "He's got no MBA, no tech background," Clark argued, slamming Elias's file on the table. "This is nepotism disguised as inspiration. Shareholders will balk at a guy who's been on unemployment rolls." The board murmured agreement, digging into Elias's records, his disability discharge, the gaps in employment, the welfare checks during Sophie's worst health spells. "He's a PR stunt," one member scoffed. "What happens when he cracks under pressure?" Elias felt the resistance. Memos he sent were delayed, requests for audits ignored. He confronted Clark in the operations wing one evening. "If I'm not wanted here, say it," Elias said, his voice low but firm. Clark crossed his arms. "It's not personal, but Helix isn't a charity. We need proven leaders, not sob stories." Elias held his gaze. "I've proven myself in ways you can't imagine. But if my presence threatens your ego, I'll walk." He turned away, but Clark's words lingered like smoke. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Ruby Valdez called Alexandra with updates on the Harbor Light fire. "Arson confirmed," Ruby said over the phone. "Tampered window locks, disabled cameras. And get this, it matches patterns from your mother's case, same accelerant traces, same corporate ties." Alexandra's blood ran cold. Her mother's factory had supplied parts to early Helix prototypes. Was this revenge or a cover-up resurfacing? She confided in Elias that night, her hands trembling as she paced his living room. "Someone's targeting me, maybe from inside." Elias's instincts kicked in. He reviewed Helix's security logs, discreetly spotting anomalies, unauthorized access to the executive floors. "This isn't random," he told her. "We need to—" The alarm blared mid-sentence, but it wasn't from his phone. Back at Helix, the building's system screamed to life. Smoke billowed from the 19th floor electrical room, a short circuit escalating into flames. Panic erupted, employees rushed for elevators, ignoring protocols. Elias grabbed his coat. "Stay with Sophie," he told Alexandra, already dialing Clark. "I'm going in." He arrived amid chaos, the lobby filling with acrid haze. Firefighters were en route, but Elias didn't wait. "Stairs! West side now!" he shouted, directing stragglers. Clark emerged from an office, pale. "The server's down. People are trapped up there." Elias assessed the east stairs were blocked by fallen debris. "Follow me," he commanded, leading a group upward through the west stairwell. His knee screamed with each step, but he pushed on, checking floors, pulling colleagues from smoke-filled rooms. On the 19th, flames licked the walls. Elias improvised a wet cloth mask from a break-room sink, smashing a window for ventilation. He found 2 engineers coughing in the server bay, guiding them out just as a panel exploded. Down below, Alexandra arrived, heart-pounding, watching as Elias emerged, last soot-blackened, but alive. The fire was contained, no casualties. Clark approached him outside, voice hoarse. "You saved us. I was wrong." Elias clapped his shoulder. "We save each other, that's the job." But as sirens wailed, Elias knew the real fire, the one threatening Alexandra, was just beginning. In the aftermath of the Helix fire, Elias's role solidified overnight. The board, swayed by his quick thinking and the lives he had preserved, approved his permanent appointment without further debate. Clark's opposition crumbled. He tendered a formal apology in a company-wide email acknowledging Elias's expertise. Elias wasted no time overhauling the safety protocols, installing advanced smoke detectors, retraining staff on evacuation drills, and integrating AI monitoring for electrical hazards. He collaborated closely with Lieutenant Ruby Valdez, sharing Helix's internal logs that revealed suspicious patterns, tampered access codes matching those from the Harbor Light blaze. Ruby's investigation deepened. "These aren't isolated," she told Elias and Alexandra in a secure meeting at police headquarters. "The accelerant traces link back to a disgruntled former contractor for Helix, someone your mother fired years ago, Alexandra. And the timing, it aligns with board votes where Clark pushed for your ouster." Alexandra's face paled as the pieces connected her mother's factory fire had been no accident either, covered up by the same network of corporate sabotage. Clark, it turned out, had been feeding information to the culprit, hoping to destabilize Alexandra's leadership and claim the CEO spot. The confrontation unfolded in Helix's boardroom. Armed with Ruby's evidence, email trails, financial transfers, Alexandra faced Clark across the polished table. "You nearly killed me," she said, her voice ice cold. Clark denied at first, but the proof was irrefutable. He was escorted out by security, his career in ruins, facing charges for conspiracy to arson. The company stabilized almost immediately. Shareholders praised the swift action, and Helix's stock ticked upward. For Elias, the resolution brought personal shifts. His salary covered Sophie's specialist visits, and her asthma attacks grew rarer with better meds. He moved them to a modest house in the suburbs with a yard where Sophie could play without wheezing from city smog. But the real change was emotional. One evening, as Sophie slept, Alexandra arrived unannounced, her usual poise cracked. "I almost lost everything again," she admitted, sinking onto the couch beside him. "Like with my mother, I push people away because I'm afraid they'll burn up too." Elias took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "I've been there. After my wife's accident, I shut down, focused only on Sophie, afraid to let anyone in. But you've shown me it's worth the risk." They talked through the night, sharing vulnerabilities, her isolation in the cutthroat world of tech, his guilt over the child he couldn't save in that long-ago blaze. As dawn broke, Alexandra leaned in, her lips brushing his in a tentative kiss. "I don't want to face this alone anymore," she whispered. Their relationship blossomed quietly. Dinners became routine. Alexandra cooking simple meals in Elias's kitchen, laughing as Sophie helped with dessert. Elias introduced her to his old firefighting buddies who teased him about trading hoses for boardrooms. Alexandra, in turn, brought him into her world, attending galas where she proudly linked arms with him, ignoring the raised eyebrows from elite circles. One crisp autumn night, over a backyard fire pit safely contained, of course Alexandra turned to Elias. "I love you," she said, her eyes reflecting the flames. "Not because you saved me, but because you see me, the real me, beyond the title." Elias pulled her close. "And I love you for giving me a future I thought was ashes." Sophie, peeking from the window, smiled knowingly. She had already started calling Alexandra Aunt Alex, but Elias knew it was evolving into something more familial. Helix transformed under their influence. Elias's systems prevented minor incidents from escalating, earning him quiet respect from the staff. Alexandra found peace. Her mother's unresolved death finally closed with the arsonist's arrest. Together, they built not just a safer company, but a life-intertwined proof that from destruction could rise something enduring. Elias no longer felt like an outsider. He had found his place not in the flames, but in the steady glow of connection. 1 month after Clark's downfall, Elias stood in a quiet Minneapolis chapel, his left hand still scarred but steady, as he slipped a simple gold band onto Alexandra's finger. The wedding was intimate. No lavish receptions or media fanfare, just a handful of friends, Ruby Valdez as a witness, and Sophie beaming in a flower girl dress, tossing petals with glee. "You look like a princess, Aunt Alex," Sophie whispered, hugging Alexandra's legs. Alexandra knelt, tears glistening. "And you're my little guardian angel." Helix thrived under the new safeguards Elias implemented. Incident reports dropped by half, employee morale soared, and the company's reputation for ethical tech innovation attracted fresh investments. Alexandra delegated more, finding balance in her role as CEO while cherishing evenings with Elias and Sophie, reading bedtime stories, sharing homemade dinners, watching the city lights from their new home's porch. Their love wasn't a fairy tale rush. It was forged in shared trials. Elias taught Alexandra to trust instincts over spreadsheets, while she showed him vulnerability didn't mean weakness. Sophie blossomed. Her asthma managed her laughter-filling rooms, once silent with worry. "Daddy, is this our forever family?" she asked one night, curled between them on the couch. Elias kissed her forehead. "Yes, kiddo, it is." As seasons turned, Elias reflected on that fateful morning, the fire that could have ended everything, but ignited something profound. He and Alexandra often walked the streets near Harbor Light, now rebuilt safer thanks to his consultations. "You didn't just save me," Alexandra said during one stroll, her hand in his. "You saved us from lives half-lived." And to you reading this story, remember, kindness isn't a weakness. It's the spark that defies darkness. Elias could have run from the flames, prioritizing his interview, his survival, but he chose to turn back, proving that true strength lies in lifting others even when your own world is crumbling. Love, too, transcends titles and traumas. It blooms in the ashes of doubt, bridging gaps of class and pain. In a world obsessed with power and profit value, the invisible, the quiet heroism in everyday choices, the bonds that heal unseen wounds. Life's fires will come, but with courage and connection, you'll emerge not scarred, but transformed. Elias, Alexandra, and Sophie did. So can you. Under the twinkling city lights, their family stood as a testament. From one act of bravery, endless hope unfolds.